Hi, I'm Chad.
And I'm Stephanie. Welcome to the Lawyerist Podcast, one of the ways we help lawyers build healthier firms, better businesses, and more sustainable lives.
And today, Zack talks with Zeina, one of our business transformation consultants.
Yeah, they're going to talk about how to leverage DISC profiles, which is a tool that we use here internally for our team and also with our clients. Lab members get their DISC results when they join lab. And I think, Chad, you'd agree that it's usually pretty eye-opening when they kind of see their results.
Yeah, it's eye-opening when they see the results, and then also eye-opening when they're reminded of their results. I'd had a lab star I was talking with before we went away for our 4th of July break, and she was having some things that she was dealing with her team, and I said, well, I know that you and your team have taken DISC. Have you looked at the DISC profiles? How are you guys communicating? Remember, everybody communicates differently. And for her, that was an eye-opener because she said to me, I forgot all about DISC. She's like, so thank you so much for bringing that up. And that was her takeaway from that call, was she was going to go back to her DISC profiles for her and her team, because they had all done it, and work on their communication. Everybody has a different style.
Yeah, and it's good to remember that you have this tool at your disposal if you've used it, if you've taken it, because it is something that when you read it, people are like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. And then, like you said, they sometimes forget about it, put it in the drawer, and kind of, don't use it. But we want to encourage people, if you've done it and if you use it, really use it as an active tool.
Yeah.
I know we just did some leadership training, and one of the things we talked about was DISC as leaders. And, I'm sure Zeina gets into this, but one of the examples, for people who are high I, they really love people, and sometimes they want to avoid conflict. Well, you could imagine how that might show up as a leader. Those people might be more reluctant to want to engage in some of those harder conversations, right? So knowing that about yourself or knowing that about other people, it's just a tool that you can use and maybe give you some steps or some ways to like how you might show up differently for yourself and for your team.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think when we think about why do people forget about it, because we take in so much information that it all just, I heard this great quote over the weekend, and it was, a river doesn't become more powerful by putting more water in it. It gets more powerful through focus, right? Think about a water hose, right? A spigot, right? Versus dumping a cup of water on something. The difference in the power is the focus. And I think when we're always taking in more and more information, and that's how I took that quote, was we're always taking in all this information, we don't really focus any of it in a direction. And it reminded me of that.
Yeah, I really love that, because I feel that sometimes too, like with just reading. Like I read a lot of business books, and to your point, it's like, here's another framework, here's another tool, here's another thing I can use. And instead of just kind of sometimes going back to the ones that we know that do work, and like, how do we actually make sure we're using them every day like we do with DISC? Now I've kind of taken to start rereading some business books, because I'm like, I just need to go back and remember what it said and put that into action. So that quote's hitting me. I'm liking that.
Yeah, it hit me too. I was like, man, that's so true. And I'm guilty of that.
Yeah, for sure. Same. Well, with that, why don't we check out Zack's conversation with Zeina and learn more about how you can get started using the DISC tool. But then if you've used it before, maybe this is a good reminder of what kind of insights it might give you to your communication style or to those on your team, so that you can focus, like Chad said, and use it.
Yeah.
Hi, I am Zeina Baydoun, business transformation consultant at Affinity Consulting. So in addition to the business transformation and strategic work that I do, one of my great passions is leadership development and coaching with our clients. And DISC is something I use pretty often to help leaders and their teams begin the self-awareness journey and becoming a bit more aware of one another. Mm-hmm. And usually that has the wonderful effect of improving communication on a team, helping people see each other, differently, or maybe even for the first time. And so that's a little bit about me and my passion for DISC.
I like it. And we'll get into what DISC is here in a second in case people don't know. But that kind of fits into the overall idea of, communication being a major part of leadership development and business transformation and all that. So Zeina, I really appreciate you being here with me. You and I have been able to chat a good bit because we're all on the same team and affinity. Well, so the first thing that I want to start with that I think is the obvious question is, what is DISC? What do you mean by that? If I'm not a person that, obviously DISC, what are we talking about?
I guess in the most simple way that I can explain, DISC is an assessment, a tool that helps you understand yourself better. And when you take the assessment as part of a team, it also is going to help you understand your teammates a little bit better. It is not a personality test. It is not the entirety, of who you are as a person. Of course, we are multifaceted. We have so many different layers to us. But DISC focuses on observable behavior. So it's, in essence, going to tell you a little bit about your preferences for how to communicate, how you make decisions, how you approach work, and your preferences for interacting with others. And yes, they've boiled it down to 4 styles, if you will.
So we're talking this is kind of, if people have heard of Myers-Briggs or something like that, that's the type of thing that we're talking about. But we're not talking necessarily about the depth of something like the Enneagram.
No, definitely not to that depth, and probably not even as deep as a Myers-Briggs type of assessment.
Okay.
This is really focused on behavior, preferences in how you communicate, how you show up.
Okay.
It's sort of that instinctual way that you react, respond, communicate what you do without much thought or effort, kind of that instinct.
And to be clear, I've taken the DISC assessment. I've taken. I was telling my wife, I was like, I'm gonna interview Zeina about the DISC assessment, and to be upfront about this for our listeners, I'm kind of a skeptic of personality tests. So we'll get into that. And my wife was like, well, for a skeptic, you've taken a lot of personality tests. I've taken the Enneagram. I've taken the Myers-Briggs. I've taken the strength, the Strength Finder. I've taken DISC. I've taken all of these things, and so but they're all different. They're all a little bit different. So let's talk about DISC. Has these 4 categories, as one can imagine, because they're separated into D, I, S, and C, right? So what are we talking about there? And they're like you said, they're kind of natural or knee-jerk communication styles. Okay.
Kind of your sort of your default behavioral comfort zone.
Okay.
When you haven't had a chance to really overthink what you're about to say or what you're about to do, kind of that instinct.
Uh-huh.
When a certain circumstance or situation arises. But what we're talking about with DISC, and you mentioned the D, the I, the S, and the C. So we're all a blend of all 4. But D, which we like to refer to as dominance. So it's, how do I address problems and challenges? Folks that are really high scoring in D tend to be a bit more assertive, more aggressive, really push towards the finish line, right?
Oh, that's
and
not
then your
me.
lower Ds are going to be quite the opposite, right? They're more reflective. They take a little more time before acting. And then the I, which I'm a pretty high I, which probably is going to be apparent to you and some of our listeners today. So I refers to influence. So how do I interact and influence the people around me? High I's are all about people, all about relationships. They trust rather quickly. All about connection, sort of that human connection is really important to them. And then, of course, the lower I's are going to be a bit more reserved. It's going to take a little bit more time for them to warm up and trust folks.
What do you mean by high and lower? on that. Because I if people, and I'm sorry because I've taken this, I'm thinking of this as the disc wheel. And so, like, what do you mean by higher and lower in the D or I?
Yeah, so scores. So when you take the DISC assessment, you basically end up with a score in D, I, S, and C.
Okay.
So those scores taken together, basically, you're a customized blend of all 4 styles.
Okay.
So there's usually going to be 1 or 2 styles where you score rather high. So that style is probably going to be the most noticeable and something that, the people around you can point to and be like, oh yeah, I definitely see that in Z.
Okay. So I wouldn't necessarily even, I've heard people refer to themselves as like, I'm a high D, and so people wouldn't necessarily refer to themselves as a low blank. It's just, you kind of don't score on that. You would actually be the other thing in a way.
You'd be the other thing. And the cool thing about DISC, Zach, is even your low scores figure pretty prominently in your style and in your behavior. Because I'm a really high I and I'm a really low C, right? So, and I know we haven't gotten to C yet, but that low C also shows up in my behavior and in my style.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well,
so high and low is basically what we're talking about here. And, when I teach DISC and when I do the workshops, I always tell folks, think of the midline kind of 50 as, average height of a person. You're standing at an airport, just kind of people watching. If somebody that's 7 feet tall walks by, you're going to notice that person.
Okay.
And if someone who is, 4 feet tall walks by, you're probably going to notice that person. So same goes with your high and low scores with DISC. The really high scores, noticeable. It's going to really show up in your behavior. And then, of course, the really low scores as well will show up. But I know we didn't get to into S and C yet, but the way that I like folks to understand DISC is a lot of times with the teams that I work with, especially in law firms, they've never done anything at all, in terms of a self-awareness assessment or any kind of test. So DISC ends up being a pretty non-intimidating first step in that journey to understanding, yourself. And I think when you understand yourself, it turns on the awareness lamp, if you will, and you start to sort of think, well, hey, if I have a style and I have a certain way of sort of showing up, other people might too. And you end up really starting to sort of understand behavior as opposed to judging it.
Okay.
And that's honestly what I see in firms. So the minute that I understand that, hey, Z, you've got this sort of I instinct in terms of how I show up, and that's great. So now I have some awareness of me showing up as an I, and then I have a choice. Because at some point I have to ask myself, is me showing up instinctually as my usual high I self what this person, situation, or circumstance needs? And that may or may not be the ideal way for me to show up or the best way for me to show up. So DISC is not some sort of like, hey, this is who I am. Everybody just needs to sort of accept it and swallow it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be able to show up as my high I now that you guys all know this is who I am. It's actually quite the opposite. I think DISC is an invitation to grow and maybe build some capacities and cultivate some, sort of new ways of responding and showing up in situations that aren't your instinct.
And I know we haven't gotten to S and C again, but at the end of the day, we're not necessarily here to tell you what the D, I, S, and C are, because, like I said at the beginning of this, I'm kind of a personality test skeptic. I've told people I think of them as horoscopes for business. And what I mean by that, I don't mean that necessarily derogatory. And first thing, you can't, because it's not. Yeah. Anyway, I don't mean that derogatory. I mean that like if you tell people a broad enough idea of themselves, or if you give them a broad enough concept, they're gonna find themselves in it, if they are, quote unquote, a believer. So if somebody were to say, you know what, I believe in DISC, I'm going to go. And then you say, well, hey, you're a high S. They're going to go, well, here's a list of what high S's are. Oh, I see myself in that. And I feel like people are going to see themselves in that. And then we pack that Enneagram away and we go, good luck. And so from that perspective, I have always been a skeptic of these types of things, because it's like, I've seen it as a way to give people who are blunt and abrupt an excuse to be blunt and abrupt. And that's not what this is really about. Yeah. It's that this is who I am aspect of it that really kind of, frankly, pisses me off. But
I agree. And I think, at a surface level, that could be the, where DISC begins and ends for an individual or a team. Right. Just, hey, we all kind of know he's a high D over there. She's a high S. Everybody, they can kind of stay in their box and in their bucket, and we all just sort of adjust to that reality. But, the way I teach DISC is, okay, so that's your starting point. All right. You have some awareness now.
We have some knowledge.
Your instincts on how you prefer to show up. What's easiest for you in terms of how you respond and react to your environment and people and situations and circumstances. But that's not where I like it to end. I like folks to understand that typically the hardest thing for your style to do is where your growth is. So for instance, I'm a high I, right? And I have a low C. So C are analytical, very detail oriented, folks. They are all about accuracy and getting things right? So I'm a low C. By definition, that means I break rules. I'm more pioneering. I'm more just, I don't know, should we do it that way? I know that's the way we've always done it, but should we keep doing it that way? So my growth is not in doubling down on my high I. My growth is in developing a capacity for slowing down, paying attention to the details, listening, creating space for that, maybe leaning a little bit more into that analytical, detail-oriented capacity that I absolutely have. So my growth is not doubling down on what is easiest and instinctual. It's actually in growing in the ways that are a little harder for me and require me to stretch a little bit more. Because there is going to come a day where I am sitting with a high C. And if I show up as my high I self, that conversation is probably going to go flat. We're not going to connect. We're not going to be able to get done what we need to get done in that interaction as teammates or as colleagues. So I got to adjust and adapt.
That's honestly the place where I get past my skepticism. That's, I've had a lot of discussions with our people internally that do our DISC reports. For context, I'm also, as you can imagine, I'm high in the I area, which is, contactability, projects self-confidence, would rather talk than listen. But where I get past my skepticism is this idea of using knowledge about ourselves and about how we show up to show up better in communicating with other people, as opposed to saying, well, I'd rather talk than listen, so just let me talk.
Exactly. You all got to accept that this is who I am, and everybody has to adjust and adapt to me and just accept that in some absolute way. But we know that that's not how growth works,
Right.
And That's not what makes a team work. And I always like to tell people the most empowering thing that any human being can sort of experience is knowing that they had a choice to do the thing, say the thing that they're about to do, right? And when we sort of just stay in our sort of default style or pattern, and we're sort of lazy about it, and we just do very instinctually, very automatically what we like to do, what is effortless, what is very comfortable and lazy, if you will. And then we don't get the result that we want. We don't get that, that result. And the minute that we stop, pause, and there's an instinct and something I want to do or say in this situation. But the minute I create that space, even for a millisecond, and I say, okay, is what I'm about to do or say the best thing that I can do or say based on the person, the situation, and the goal? And if I make that choice, it's pretty empowering to say, yeah, you know what? This is a situation, Z, where you can kind of show up in that typically very enthusiastic, really building that connection, really focusing on that relationship. Other times, it's calling for me to do the exact opposite. So that space to make a choice to do or say the next thing, I think is really, really empowering.
I'm gonna say this, I think that's an understatement in a weird way. You're really speaking to my religious studies heart, my philosophy heart here, because
I was a philosophy major too.
Because we're kind of getting into that's free will in a sense.
It's free will.
The most empowering thing we can have as a human is a choice, and this idea of the choice, and I think that's amazing. And not to kind of boil that down to something, but DISC actually measures that in a way, right? Because we have this how you act normally, when you can take a beat, when you can take a second, and then how you act under pressure as well. Kind of talk to me about that, because that helps me with my idea of this being a way to put people into boxes and honestly take away some of that free will.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's, the moment that we sort of understand that we have a default pattern, style, way of showing up behaviorally, of course, observable behavior.
Right.
Stress does a lot to that, So in my usual high I style, you add stress to my environment, I'm probably showing up even more scattered, even maybe coming off a bit more unrealistic. Maybe my optimism is starting to annoy everyone because I really want everything to work out. And it can be a little crazy, And I think there's also an opportunity to practice some self-compassion, I guess, in a sense, because if I know that stress, and extreme pressure sort of makes certain buttons get pushed, and I help the people around me understand me a little bit more in situations like that, now I can lean into the support that, the people around me probably want to give me that I don't ever create space for, and vice versa. Because when I do DISC at law firms that are undoubtedly the most stressful atmospheres that you could probably think of when you think of stress.
Yeah.
It really changes it, because it's all right, now I'm looking over there at Susie. I know a little bit more about her. I know that some of what I'm seeing and experiencing is her way of sort of managing and dealing with that stress, which is not always ideal. So instead of judging, instead of taking any of that personally, instead of coming into work tomorrow and thinking, oh, she is this, I've just labeled her and I've judged her and I'm basically attributing a personality trait to her now. I instead say, hey, we're human beings. We all, undergo stress and pressure, and each of us deals with it a little bit differently. We almost give each other space to be human when we understand that, because I do it, they're doing it, and the way that I would want someone to create space for me and sort of accept me, I do the same. So,
the create space and accept me thing, I think is, again, this is where I became less of a skeptic, because we use DISC inside, internally, and I'm a high I, again, and one of or some of the descriptors of quote unquote blind spots or places for growth, or as my wife likes to say, opportunities, for me, are, it may struggle with follow through on details, or can be overly optimistic about timelines or feasibility. And oh my God, that nails me. Absolutely. So those are my blind spots. But the beauty of this in my experience, when you use this as a team, is that yes, you get that from me, and I can work on that, because again, we have free will. But the thing that you get from that, also from my high I, is engaging and persuasive, building rapport and energizing teams quickly, comfortable with change and new ideas. And it's like, oh, okay. So instead of just saying, well, this person doesn't blank, Zack has, on the report card, has trouble with deadlines. Sure.
Or remembering details. Yeah.
Yeah. Or remembering details. And so it's like, okay, well, but he's also really creative. And so maybe he can create something that helps him with his deadlines, or something like that. I think that's the big thing is how we, that being able to show up and be more human, giving ourselves this ability to be like, okay, well, yeah, that is me. I can work on it. But that is me.
Of course. And as your teammate and colleague, now I have an opportunity and a choice to lean in, and I know exactly how I can support you now. So that blind spot, that thing that isn't necessarily your strength. So okay. You are so immersed in this conversation, and you're so present, and you're so engaged that, I may need to send you an email afterwards to give you the bullet points maybe of what we discussed and what we decided is going to happen next. That's okay. It's something that you might need that another, style may not need. The moment that we sort of lean into some of those blind spots, those become opportunities for your team to show up for you. So here comes the ways that you all can support me and help me be better, while also allowing me to shine my light brightly in the ways that I do. But of course, growth also means, all right, maybe I try to build a little more capacity for listening, paying attention to details. And those really end up being ways that I grow professionally and personally if I can activate some of that in the times that I need it. I don't now have to become, all of a sudden some high C all the time. It's just, hey, here's a situation where I can pull out that tool because I need it. Yeah. I need it here. Yeah. And it's going to make me, achieve my goal, be more successful, make sure that this interaction, lands well. And knowing that we have a toolbox is awesome. And I always tell folks, yes, you're going to have your favorite tool. Maybe it's a hammer or a wrench in that toolbox that you want to pull out as often as possible because you just love it. Mm-hmm. But it's cool to know that you have other tools in there that you can pull out. And I will tell you, I am usually proudest of myself in moments where I show up a little bit differently and more appropriate for the situation or circumstance. And I activate that sort of not always utilized aspect of myself, and I allowed it to show up. It's like, wow, look at that. I stepped back and I created space. And I'm usually the one that jumps up and does everything, that suggests everything, that, that sort of,
Yeah.
And there are times where I'm just like, social experiment, I am going to not say anything right now. I am going to step back and let others around me step up and not put this like pressure on me all the time to be the one that drives the social connection and engagement in a room, because I put that pressure on myself too. And I'm just like, I want to be a witness. I want to be like a participant. I want to be amazed, surprised. I want some magic to happen in this environment. So let me turn me off a little bit and let me just kind of step back and just enjoy this and just see what happens, And I think when we step outside a little bit of who we usually are and how we usually show up, that also creates a little bit of magic in our day and in our environments. And it's kind of cool, I think.
I love that. I love that.
So
and so we've
eyes,
gone from me being a skeptic of this being magic to this being magic.
Yeah. As long as you don't write, like you said, Zach, at the very beginning, as long as it's not this, oh, well, you all know who I am now. And this is the only thing I'm going to be. And this is the only way that I'm going to show up. And all of you have to sort of, accept it and deal with it, which unfortunately is the leadership style of a lot of folks that I work with. And I think massaging that a bit and helping them see that there is something great waiting for them on the other side, if they can just let go of that mindset and maybe invite themselves to show up a little bit differently. I always say, just don't do anything. If you're in a situation and the conditioning, is sort of telling you, do this, say this.
Do it.
Just don't do it. Just don't do anything. Just kind of stand there and just like resist. Resist the urge and the temptation to do that thing. Yeah. At that moment, you're actually rewiring your brain a bit, because you're almost telling that very, it's an addiction. We like to kind of show up a certain way when we've conditioned ourselves.
Makes us feel better
in that way. But when you sort of like say no, you're creating space potentially, even if it's a millisecond, and just not doing what you usually do is rewiring. There's some like neuroplasticity happening in that moment. And then you can sort of do it again. And eventually you're going to choose a different behavior in that situation. And that's how change happens.
I love that. I love this idea of DISC, of a personality assessment that is a team personality assessment, being something that A, can kind of enhance free will, and B, something that can promote growth and internal growth for ourselves and our teams. So I think that's a fantastic switch of how to look at it. So I appreciate that, Zeina.
Oh, I love talking about this stuff, and I'm really glad that we started with DISC being potentially a box that folks might feel stuck in. And like you said, almost overgeneralizing, who we are. We're so much more complex, right, than an assessment could ever capture, and really treating it as starting point. But now my job is to grow almost in the opposite of my style.
Right. Make myself
There's
more
my
complete.
growth. It's the opposite. Yeah. It's the opposite. And that's, I'm telling you, when people are most proud of themselves. So my introverts that are more, reserved, that are a bit more careful and cautious, when I see them activate that, sort of engagement, excitement, enthusiasm, kind of let out their personality a little bit more and build relationships and be more expressive, that brings a tear to my eye. Because I'm like, wow, I know the courage that it takes for someone like that to activate something that is so not natural for them, that requires a huge amount of effort. And that's when you start saying, wow, it's amazing. And I think all of us have the capacity to lean into all four.
I love that. I love that idea that all of us have capacity to lean into all four.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Zeina, I really appreciate you talking to me about DISC assessments and really leadership growth and team growth and personal growth here. I think that's really what we're talking about. So I really appreciate your time. If people want to find you, I assume they can find you on LinkedIn and places like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So LinkedIn, and then of course, Affinity Consulting is on LinkedIn. Yeah. We do a lot of this DISC work on an individual level, on a team level. And really the idea is self-awareness that becomes team awareness. And then we have some tools to communicate and collaborate better and not use who we are or who we like to show up as an excuse.
Love it. Well, once again, Zeina, thank you very much for being with me and for talking to me about something that I don't always like to talk about.
All right. Well, this is great. It's been a great conversation, and thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.